Hello. Thank you for your patience there. Just a few technical issues, but we can get started now. So thank you all for coming to this session. It's my last talk of the year, so yeah, I hope to make it a good one and a useful one for you. I'm going to be talking about architecture modernization with domain-driven design. And I thought I would start by sharing one of the quotes that came up during my work this year. I felt it was quite an accurate quote that summarizes where a lot of companies are at times. So I was starting with a new company and just having some meetings to get to know people, talking to various people in the company. I had a meeting with the VP of marketing. I'm just asking him, what are your challenges? What's going through your mind at the moment? What are the key challenges and issues that you're facing? Maybe in the context of how IT and software could help you to work more efficiently. And we were having a nice conversation to begin with. He's like, yeah, my car broke down, and because of the pandemic and supply chains, he couldn't get some part for his car. He had to wait 3 months to use his car or something. So just having a nice chat, and then we got talking about work, and he starts talking about what you can see on the screen here. I'm like, yeah. So how's work? What's going through your mind at the moment? What's your team working on? And he's like, after a few minutes, he just gets into, you know what? I'm really frustrated. It's taking a lot of time to get anything done. Me and my team in marketing, we've got a lot of big ideas and a lot of big plans in the roadmap we're looking to achieve. And one of the key focuses has been improving our SEO and our personalization. And one of the projects he wanted to get done, his team wanted to get done, was putting some text boxes on some web pages to get a bit more information from the user. And then I could just, it was a remote conversation. This was an American company, and I could just see, in the video, some subtle facial gestures, like he was pretty upset. He was a bit annoyed and frustrated because it had taken months. He said he had to wait months. He doesn't get any feedback from the teams working on it. He's like, my work goes into a backlog. They say it's going to take 6 weeks or 3 months, and it's still not done after 6 months. He's getting so frustrated, and he's like, everything takes this amount of time, but it never used to be like that in the past. So that's the kind of focus, the kind of motivations for today's talk. If you connect with some of these feelings about why is everything taking so long, and these are the kind of situations I'm going to focus on. And I think this is what I think of in my mind. This is kind of my mental model for when I meet people like this. Like at the start, when we're building something new, everything's fast and easy and quick. We've got a blank canvas, nothing holding us back. It's like a Formula One car, but then over time, the IT department just turns into an old car that just doesn't want to work anymore. It takes 50 starts to get the engine going. It breaks down. Why is this happening? From my perspective, it doesn't really make sense why we have this pattern in IT, because we have teams, they're learning to work together. They're learning about the domain they're working in. Over time, we should get better at delivering software, but for some reason, things get worse and take longer. So what's causing this? A couple of examples that stand out to me that capture this kind of pattern. The first one's called Company X, because it's not a good thing I'm going to say about them. It's a real thing. It's not really slashing any dirt or rumors or anything like that, but the company was a market leader. Been a market leader for like 5 to 10 years. Got a bit complacent. They were always #1 in the industry rankings and stuff. Basically, all they had to do was keep their system running, and they would be the market leader. But that complacency over time became a bit of a problem for the company. They started losing a bit of market share. The industry rankings were starting to say, that company's UX isn't the best anymore. These new challenges, these new startups are improving. And this company realized, we've got some problems here. We can't get work done quickly enough. We're starting to lose ground. And if this pattern continues in 5 years, what future does that hold for us? So they brought in a lot of new people, new CTO, new CIO, new product people, new agile people, all that stuff, throwing some big numbers at this. And as you can see here, after 1 year of this big new transformation, couldn't even get one line of code into the cloud using serverless. I'm not exaggerating at all. That is a very true story. So many cultural issues and hurdles and technical challenges to overcome. Couldn't get one line of code into production. As you can see with the other company here, Kazoo is a brand new startup working from a blank canvas. They built an entire online car dealership in 90 days. Can you just see the difference between those two companies? When you're new, your company has a huge advantage. When you're old, the company's got a lot of legacy and challenges holding you back. And sometimes, as Company X found out, you don't realize until it's too late. And so this is what companies typically mean by when they talk about modernization. They're like, we're an old company, we've got a lot of legacy, we've got these competitors who are catching up and overtaking us, and we need to modernize. And this was the story of Netflix in 2009, this quote here from Adrian Cockcroft. Netflix realized very early when they had a chance to improve. So they went from a monolith to microservices. They started all the microservices stuff, very famous for that. But as Adrian Cockcroft's talking about here, they knew that if they didn't modernize their architecture, they probably wouldn't have won. Let's say for the last 10 years. Looking forward, they might not be the winner moving forwards, but for the last 10 years, been pretty successful. So companies are on this modernization path. They want to get back to that speed they had at the start of their lifetime. But very often when we talk about modernization, just seeing some very basic things like let's take our stuff and stick it on the cloud or rebuild it in some new technologies. But really, modernization is much more than that. If you're going to spend a lot of time and effort, you want to fix everything about the system, the UX, your internal business workflows, changing your cultural ways of working. It's way more than just rewriting in the latest tech or the latest cloud infrastructure. Excuse me. So that's why I think domain-driven designs are very useful, not really a tool or a technique, it's a way of thinking, techniques and principles and a whole community. But effectively, what companies want to get to is they want to have teams working quickly with a fast flow of changes. We need to put a text box on a web page. That will take a couple of hours, not 3 months. That's what we want to get to, simple things like that. In order to have that speed in your teams, you need to have an architecture that enables your teams to work quickly and needs to be loosely coupled. You can make a change in one place and not break other stuff. Don't need to deploy 50 things together. Don't need to have 5 teams working on this new feature to try and get something into production. And to have the loosely coupled architecture, you need to understand the industry you're working in and identify your business domains and subdomains and base your architecture around those parts of your business that are naturally changing together. So, during the pandemic, a lot of things happened. A lot of things didn't happen as well. If you were trying to get some parts for your car, it might have taken a while to get those parts, as the marketing guy found out. But myself and some other people, we set about addressing the challenge of how can we help people to apply domain-driven design in a much more accessible way? If you go back a couple of years and you talked about domain-driven design, how do I learn about domain-driven design? Well, you go and buy this big blue book that was published 20 years ago, you read it, you don't understand it, and then you're on your own, basically. And we were like, let's try and improve that. So we worked on a bunch of techniques, and we tried to put together a very delicate balancing act here. We tried to put together some guide, some process, but we didn't want to make it too rigid and turn into some kind of process you have to follow. So this is what we put together. We called it the starter modeling process. Helps you to go through these different stages, and in this talk today, I'm going to take you through some of these stages. So the first one is align. If you're starting out on a modernization initiative and you're wondering, where do we start? What do we focus on? Where? I don't know. I've never done this before. What do I do? Well, as a default, you can just start here in the align step. Align with your company's business model and your user needs. Sounds very generic, so I'm not going to talk about too many obvious things here, but I'm just going to give you a quick example. So I mentioned earlier, just having a bit of a quick delay at the moment. All right. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, when I started with a new client, I was just meeting some people, having a chat, getting to know what people's thoughts are. And here's what you can do in the align step. You don't need to worry too much about techniques, just talk to people in your company or the people who are impacted by your architecture, people on the business, product, technology side, and have some conversations. So I've got an example with you. I thought I would take the example of Kazoo and build an example around that. So let's imagine this company. It's not a real company, Dreamland Dealership. It's an online car dealership. You can buy a car online, delivered to your house. That's basically it. There's a few more details, but that's basically it. So the company has this vehicle intelligence platform. So imagine you're talking to the VP of product or the CIO and they're telling you this stuff. You've got to treat everything they tell you as suspicious. You're not just taking what they say and trusting it, but here's the kind of things that people talk about. We've got this platform, helps us to make all these key decisions. We're using a lot of AI here. It's magical. So we use the platform to decide how much should we buy a car for, is there a reliability problem with the car, etc. And we analyze lots of data to do that. And also some other things about the company. You can return your car with a full refund within 2 weeks for any reason. If your car breaks down within 6 months, you get a full refund. And the company's confident they can do this because of this vehicle intelligence platform. So then, as we go around talking to different stakeholders, we can start to compare what different people are saying. Maybe some people agree that the platform's the key thing, and maybe others are disagreeing, saying, yeah, those tech guys are crazy about AI, but that's not really what's key to our company. So, you get a lot of divergence. You need to think about all these things you're hearing. And then you can create a business model canvas, as we've got an example here. I'm not going to talk all the way through this, but I'm just going to show you kind of techniques you can use. And something else I find that's quite useful is this matrix from Ansoff, really to try and understand what's your company's growth strategy. Like we talked about, we're modernizing. We don't want to modernize for how the company works now. We want to modernize for how the company's going to be working over the next few years. And with this matrix, you can get a sense of, is the company looking to build on its current products, or is it looking to build new products? Is the company looking to continue focusing on existing customers, existing markets, or move into new markets? So all these things get you, before you jump into like a lot of complex workshops and DDD and event storming and event sourcing and all those DDD things, like this is a kind of baseline setting stuff that can help you get there. So we've done some alignment. Now we're going to discover the domain, get into the domain and see how it works in the next step. So here, we can use a technique called event storming. Event storming is a collaborative technique, and we map out how a business works using orange Post-its. So in this example here, a very small extract from the Dreamland dealership example. We've got the acquisition crew. These are the people who go out to auctions. They buy cars that the company can sell, basically. So they carry out some inspection checks. They upload some information to the vehicle intelligence platform. The platform then spits out some advice, telling them, should you buy the car, should you not buy the car? We've got 3 different scenarios here. So by applying this concept of event storming, we can get into the domain. Now, the key thing about event storming is it's a very collaborative technique. It's not one person putting some orange Post-its on their own and then asking other people, does this look right? It's the opposite approach. So here's an example from last year with a German company. This particular example is in the yoga room on a farm 1 hour north of Berlin. Totally irrelevant details, but I thought I'd share it anyway. So in this workshop, we mapped out the company's process. We had 5 teams together. A lot of them, I don't know how many, but they hadn't met each other in person due to the pandemic. So we spent some time mapping out their process. You can see all these orange Post-its here. The way this was constructed was people just adding bits all over the place in a bit of a chaotic brainstorming fashion. And then after we've done that, we kind of slow the pace down a bit and we just talk through the event storm. Just talking through the story basically, what are we seeing here through all these events we've put together? And so in this example, we had an issue that was happening at this part of the process in the timeline. One team has to sanitize and clean up some data. But because they could only do that successfully around 90% of the time, that was causing problems for all of the other teams. And it wasn't until everyone got together and we talked this process all the way through that people could start piecing those details together. And as we went through this process, one of the teams said, we could probably make some progress on that issue. We just need to build this API. We don't have time for it. And another team said, we already have the API. And that evening, they hooked it up when we were having dinner. Something else that was very interesting in this workshop, as we talked through the timeline, I'm just asking questions like, oh, you've got a bug here, or an edge case, let's say, not a happy path. How often does this happen? A simple facilitator question. And developer says, yeah, not very often. We don't need to talk about that too much. But because in the workshop we had a mixture of people, someone who worked in the customer success team said, oh no, we have that problem quite often. Just this morning, I had 2 drivers who were complaining about that exact problem. So in these workshops, you can identify where people see things differently, where there's some misunderstandings about how things work. And here's kind of what's going on from an abstract level. We have our business, or we have our domain, and we have these different areas that different teams are responsible for. But very rarely do people get to see the whole picture in lots of detail. And so if Team A is causing a problem for Team E, as we found out, they don't even realize that they're causing a problem for Team E. And Team E might not realize, if we talk to Team A, there's a simple fix for that solution. Or we've got an API that can fix their problems. We're talking 5 teams here. In a company with hundreds of teams, fine. But even with 5 teams, you realize that there's a real strong silo effect in some companies, especially when working remotely sometimes. So we've looked at the discover step. We're now going to jump to the decompose step. This is where we've taken our domain and mapped it out. And we want to start identifying boundaries, domain boundaries, and identifying subdomains. And these subdomains become the template for our architecture and our teams, as we were talking about earlier. So after you've mapped out an event storm, you can then start to partition it into these different domains and subdomains. In this example here, we've got marketing, sales, data analytics and stuff. In your company, it can be something different. And the key thing is, at this point, when we're just starting out, event storming is a tool that enables us to explore and play around. We're not trying to get to perfect boundaries too quickly. One of the biggest problems I've seen with companies moving to microservices is just ad hoc creating a new microservice, like developers working on a new feature, got some requirements. Let's build a new microservice for that. And then 6 months later, it turns out, probably shouldn't have done that. So with event storming, it gives you a chance to flatten your business and think about what might be the right way to shape this. So we're still in the shaping moment at this point. And once we've identified those domains and subdomains, we can then start to apply some checks and assessing them to validate those boundaries. So in this example here, I've got some questions. So the first one, do the names of your events fit with the name you've given to your subdomain? So in this example, we've got an abstract representation. We've got a domain called Blue Circle. Blue Circle fits, Red Triangle probably doesn't fit, Blue Triangle maybe, Blue Circle, okay. And what we can also do is we can ask the question, do the event names all seem consistent with each other? And then that takes us into the space of, what's the difference between a user journey or some kind of funnel and a domain or a subdomain? We start getting into that space, which everyone gets to going through this process. So, here's an example from the example online car dealership I was talking about. So we've got the pick up and drop off subdomain. This is the team of people that takes cars to people's houses once they've bought them online. So, picked up a new car from the warehouse. Pick up, fits. Arrived at the customer's house. Yeah, that fits. We offloaded the new car. Fits. Gave the new owner a guide of the car. That one's a bit different. Here we've got something logistics, and now this one's about explaining how a car works. Question mark on that one. It may or may not be part of this, but question mark. Likewise, the next one. Is breakdown insurance a concept that fits within this idea of picking up and dropping off cars? At this point, we're not sure, so we just put a question mark on it. Things what we're going to come back to later, and then the other two are green. So at this point, we're just going through this process of identifying possible subdomains, analyzing them, and exploring where do we need to go deeper and get more details, and where are we quite confident already. Another concept I talk about is the concept of a scattered domain. It's where you've got an event storm, but not all of the events that relate to a certain subdomain are in the same area. So in this example here, I've got bits of blue, and they're all conceptually the same subdomain. They're just not together. When I do this activity for the first time with a group of people, naturally, it always looks like this. Everything, nice little chunks that all fit together, but reality's much more like this, where not everything fits neatly together, so that's a key thing to keep in mind. All right, so on this journey, using this modeling process to guide us, we've done some decomposing into domains and subdomains. We could go anywhere from here, but we're going to go back into Discover. We've identified some question marks as we would identifying the domains and subdomains, and we want to deep dive a bit more first to get some clarity around those domain boundaries. So, a couple of caveats here. I think I don't know what percentage, but a lot of people make some big decisions based on some very high level information, and that scares me. So, if I can go back. I consider this to be the first draft of the domains and subdomains. Some people consider this to be, that's good, let's ship it. That's definitely not the right approach. We need to get much more into the details. So trying to avoid staying high level. And also, as I talked about earlier, I think it's important to explore what the future looks like in this domain. Before you start mapping out the current state of your business, identifying domains and subdomains that work for what you've got now. As we talked about at the start, looking at the Ansof's matrix, thinking about what does the company look like in the future, and how might you make sure you're designing boundaries that are long-term effective. So for that, we can use another flavor of event storming called process modeling. And there's two benefits to this approach. The first one is we reduce the scope. So a couple of slides ago, I was talking about the pick up and drop off, and we had those two question marks. We might use process modeling to zoom in just to that one particular subdomain and clarify those two question marks. And as we reduce the scope, we increase the granularity, getting more into the details. My mouth is so dry. All right, so as we talked about, when we're getting into the details and we're thinking about modernization, this is a great point to think about other things that can be modernized, not just the tech. So as we go through process modeling, which bits of the UX can be improved? Which bits of the business workflow can be improved? Are there manual steps in there? Are there any bugs that haven't been fixed for a long time that maybe now's the opportunity? I was at a talk recently, two people from the New York Times were talking about their modernization journey, and as they were going around talking to people, one of the questions they were asking is, what things have you given up asking for? You've been asking for years and it never gets fixed. What are those things? Let it all out. And this is what we're trying to figure out here too. And also with process modeling, we can start mapping out current potential future states as well. So a very short extract here. We've got a customer who raises a defect in the support system. A ticket's raised. The ticket gets added to the new issues jobs list. That's a screen that someone looks at, a support agent. They look at the list, click on a job, assign it to me in the agent system. So as we get more into the granular details like this, talking about specific screens, we can then start to ask these questions. So I find it's a good practice to put times. How long does something take? And not just the average, but the range. So 1 to 5 days, for example, that could be a biggest problem. Let's understand why that's the case. And also down here, could we automate some tickets? So in a real workshop, you're going to have way more post-its than this. You're going to have way more questions and hotspots than this, but here's the kind of thing to expect. And so my biggest recommendation, if you're going to try this, is to get good at asking questions. And not just yourself, but other people in the group. If you can get people asking good questions and thinking more deeply, you'll get more insights, more opportunities, and you have a more interesting workshop as well. So a couple of simple questions here. First one is, how many people assume this role? So for example, how many people play the role of support agent? Is it a team of 5 people or a team of 500 people? Automating the work of 5 people is much less beneficial than automating the work of 500 people. So we're trying to get a sense of what kind of scale, what kind of benefits would there be to automating stuff. We might have a manual process, but if it's only 2 or 3 people doing the work, it's probably not worth automating too much. The second one is, how many different roles can the same person play? When I do event storming like this, and we have these different roles, like support agent and other kinds of agent, there's a natural tendency to assume that each one of those is a different person. Just asking a simple question, could the same person play multiple roles? You get answers like, oh yes, they can actually. And these people, this particular type of people, they hate spending their time in that role because it's really frustrating, low-value work. We want them to spend all of their time doing this other role where they can add more value. And then, as I talked about earlier, how often does this happen? What's the frequency of each scenario? Just trying to work out, where's the value? You might have a small bug that doesn't happen very often, or people think that, as I gave the example earlier. So just to summarize, asking questions like this is how you get those deeper insights. And I find the more events you put on your event storm and other post-its you use, the more you put on the wall, the more it will encourage you to think about these different kinds of questions. So, build a good event storm, ask these questions, just go through the event storm and ask these questions, and you might uncover lots of interesting things. And not every question is going to open up some amazing insights about the domain, but if you ask these questions across a whole event storm, you'll uncover some decent things on average. All right, so on this journey, we've looked at align, discover, decompose, run back to discover. And now we're going to jump into connect. And connect is basically, we've taken our domain, we've identified domains and subdomains. How do we now piece them together as a system to map out interactions between them as part of end-to-end business workflows? So let's take a scenario. We've done some event storming, and here's a scenario we've been mapping out in event storming. And we want to go from this picture of the business to get more into the details of how would we design this as a software system. So very quick talk through. Scenario is winning a car at auction. So we've got the acquisition crew again. They begin inspecting a car. They carry out some inspection checks, enter the results, upload some diagnostics. The system recommends they purchase the car. They won the car at the auction, and they've scheduled a collection for that car. So one of the techniques we recommend, not the only technique, lots of different techniques you can use here, but in domain-driven design, we use a technique called domain message flow modeling. And here's the notation. So it's pretty simple, nothing too complex here. We've got an actor or persona, we've got a subdomain, we've got an app, a website, and we've got commands, queries, and events to help us think about how do we want to design this workflow? How should these different subdomains interact with each other? So, just going through the process step by step. How would we translate the event storm into an architecture? So we start with step one. We've got the acquisition crew. They've got an iPad app they're using at the auction, looking at the car. Click on the button. I've started inspecting the car. They enter the inspection results, and then they upload the vehicle diagnostics. That's the first 3 steps. Each of these steps are all going to the car inspection subdomain, which handles those. As we move into the process in a bit more detail, we now have some more interactions. So once the inspection is complete, the inspection subdomain publishes an event. That's handled by the purchase advice, which is then going to 2 other subdomains, profit margin calculation and risk assessment, gets the information it needs, calculates the purchase advice, and then publishes an event which the user sees. So now we can start again. We're not creating documentation here. We're creating a model where we can challenge and explore alternatives. So I'm seeing a lot of opportunities here. Why are we using events and not commands? Could all of those 3 subdomains be combined into one? So this is kind of conversations you want to have at this point. If we start putting lots of technical details on here, like the message bus, we kind of lose that focus on the domain, so I recommend not doing that. It's one of the things that people always say, but where's the message bus on here? Where are the internet cables on here? So just a quick recap, if you're not familiar with the concept of commands, events, and queries, I would say commands and events, one thing to think about is the workflow. If you've got 2 subdomains and they need to interact, the initial subdomain could send a command to the other. I want you to do something. I want you to close a support ticket. Or it could publish an event saying customer satisfied. And the second subdomain will say, customer satisfied, I'll close a support ticket. Really, this is a question about coupling. There's a lot of debates about commands and events and like religious wars and stuff, but really it's a decision about coupling. It's what we're thinking about here, coupling. With a command, the first subdomain is telling the second subdomain, I want you to do something. I'm deciding what's happening next. With an event, that decision coupling is reversed. The first subdomain says something's happened, and the second says, I'm going to decide what should happen next in the workflow. I don't have time to go into this in detail, but if you keep that in mind, it will lead you to some good conversations. All right, so I've got no idea how we're doing for time here, by the way. Anyway, how long we've got left? 10 minutes. Okay, no worries. So we're just getting to the end anyway. So in the last step, we're going to jump to define. We could have gone from connect to organize, or back to decompose or discover or strategize, but in this example, we'll go to define. We've identified some boundaries, we've done some connecting, and now we want to get more confidence. Are these boundaries a good choice for us in our business? So with define, we want to map out all of the design choices for a single subdomain and just get more confidence. Does the whole thing together make sense? So with message flow modeling, we normally go through different scenarios. And as we do that, as we go through each individual scenario, like this one about winning the car at the auction, it may seem like, yeah, an event's the right choice there, a query's the right choice there. But as we go through many scenarios and we combine all those insights into a big overview, we might realize, oh, we've used an event here but a command somewhere else, and it doesn't really all fit together. So in this scenario, we can use a technique called the bounded context canvas. So there's a lot to talk about here. I'll start with the simple bit. So you can put a name at the top, really easy. And already, actually, when you're putting the name of something, you can already see some problems here. When people use generic words like manager or just the word customer, generic names attract generic behaviors. So that's always, there are some trigger signs there. Also the word and. But then we can get into what are all the commands, events, and queries coming into this thing, and where are they coming from? What are all the commands and queries and events going out of this, and where are they going to? And when we see all of that together, along with the business rules, we can then start to see things that maybe aren't so obvious about the design when we're just focusing on individual scenarios. So in this example here, we've got the bookings subdomain. What might we pick on about this? So the description already tells us, well, I think even the name bookings might be a bit generic. Anything about bookings could belong here, and that's quite an open definition. Then we've got a description of it handles all the bookings and it's highly customizable. So already, why is it highly customizable? And then we can see by looking at the commands and the events, create, update, delete, create, update, delete. These are all CRUD events, basically. They're not telling us anything about the domain. What are the different reasons an order can be updated for? Why is an order being deleted? Should it be deleted? So again, I would say this is quite a simple example I see all the time. The CRUD events is quite a popular one. And if you're not clear why this isn't a good design choice, because it's really these events aren't telling us much about the domain. So again, just asking questions. Who's creating an order and why are they creating it? Who's updating an order and why are they updating it? What are the different reasons an order can be updated, for example? We can also see here, it's way over-engineered, all this create rules and customizable, flexible stuff. It's almost like a rules engine down here. Do we need that just to sell some cars? It's not clear why that complexity is here. Why is it here? So that was basically it. I'm just going to quickly try and tie together some of those themes now, and then the talk is over. So the concept of modernization for me is when companies are moving not as fast as they'd like to, when they're a bit stuck in the mud, when no work's getting done, when people are complaining about can't even put a text box on a web page. This is the scenario where companies are adopting or approaching what's called modernization. And a successful modernization will help your company to get features out the door faster. There are other benefits too, but it will help you to get back to that speed you had before. But in my experience, as someone who likes domain-driven design, I might be biased, but I think a good modernization journey starts with the domain. If you go through these different aspects of mapping out your domain and mapping it onto a system, I think you'll be much more effective than companies that don't do that. Like I said earlier, companies that are just looking at how do we rewrite the current system in new tech and not really take the chance to get into the details of the domain. If you're wondering where to get started, as I talked about, this modeling process is something we put together to try and help you. If you find it's not working or you don't agree with something or you've got improvements, it's all on GitHub. It's an open source Creative Commons thing. We're not trying to charge anyone for it. So if you have any ideas, we're always happy to appreciate that. I think this is like the third or fourth iteration of this process. So we continue trying to improve these things. There's some stuff I didn't talk about today, particularly in the strategize step. I see a lot of challenges around where do we start modernization? Do we start with something simple or something complex? There's always this trade-off between developers want to pick something simple like, let's build a small microservice to test out this concept, and the business are like, but we don't get any value from that. So these tools can help you to think about what's your company's core domain. So once you've gone through the decompose, identified your domains and subdomains, you can then use the core domain chart to think about what are the most important. And these arrows represent how you could evolve each of your subdomains. So if you go onto the GitHub page, there's a lot of content around this. Also, I put together two examples here. One's the online car dealership from this talk. Another one's an online food delivery. These come with Miro boards and some pre-prepared activities so you can try out these ideas and concepts. Yeah, there's no advertising or payment. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just keen to improve the techniques we use and get your feedback. So maybe if you do try out these activities, just 1 or 2 bits of feedback would be awesome, and that will help other people as well who are trying to apply these concepts. And so that's basically it. I hope you have a great end to the year. Thank you.